So before we get into talking about policy sets, let's just take a pause for a moment. Think about configuring on-premises environments. If you are an on-premises administrator, you're probably used to the notion of configuring group policies. A group policy is a collection of thousands of settings, potentially, that you can link to a container, such as the Departmental Organizational Unit, or OU. By so doing, you can configure lots of settings in a single step on lots of devices and lots of user accounts. So you can say that Active Directory in an on-premise environment is container-based and group policy-based. That's not the case with Intune. It's a flat, non-hierarchical system, and it doesn't use containers and it doesn't use group policies, although it does support the notion of migrating group policy settings. So we'll talk about that later. But it doesn't use that group policy mechanism for thousands of settings. Rather, it uses configuration profiles and endpoint security settings and compliance and conditional access policies, each of which is a separate element. It also supports the notion of application deployment, and each app is a separate entity. And so you tend to find that you have a very large number of very specific individual things that do maybe one or two individual configuration tasks. And that can be quite, I don't want to say it's cumbersome, but it can be quite a learning experience in transitioning from on-premise and group policy to Intune and configuration profiles and so forth. One of the things that helps make this a bit easier is using policy sets. So instead of creating a configuration profile or a compliance policy or whatever it might be and assigning it directly, instead don't assign any of those things and use a policy set to perform the assignment in a single step, which is what we'll look at now. So it enables you to assign multiple elements such as apps, app configuration policies, app protection policies, which I know we've not yet talked about, but we will. Device configuration profiles, again, something we'll look at shortly. Device compliance policies, which we covered earlier. Windows Autopilot deployment profiles, which we also looked at in an earlier session. And the enrollment status page, again, something we've touched on before. So these things can be, they're not grouped together, not at all. They are separate entities. Each one of those is a separate thing. But you can select amongst those separate things and create a single assignment through the use of a policy set. So in the demonstration, I'm going to show you how to create and assign a policy set. Okay, so in the Microsoft Intune Admin Center, we're going to start by reviewing the device configuration profiles that we might have. So I'm going to go to iOS devices. I've got a single iOS device there. Let's take a look at configuration profiles. I've got one that's going to configure email accounts. I don't think I've got any update policies, but if I did have, they'd be listed here. And then if I go to apps, and select all apps. I've filtered this already just to show the iOS apps that I've got. So Microsoft Office Lens, Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Whiteboard. I've also got an app protection policy set up for iOS in my organization. And I've also got an app configuration policy. Now we're going to be looking at protection and configuration policies for apps later on. We'll also look at generic process of deploying apps using Intune. So don't worry about that. But for now, we'll just accept that they're there. Earlier, we created compliance policies as well. So they should be in place as well. So now what I want to do is, rather than go through the process, and I'll just show this to you, going to devices and creating an iOS configuration profile. So go to configuration profiles, creating a profile for, I don't know, the deployment of Wi-Fi settings, which is a very specific thing. So iOS Wi-Fi, choosing that we're going to choose basic and then configure the network name as Contoso HQ SSID Contoso HQ1. Enable connect automatically, enable connection to hidden network, security type. We'll choose open because I just don't want to go through all the individual settings. And I'm not going to assign it as I normally would do to all devices or to a specific group or anything. I'm just going to go ahead and create the object. And so when you're using policy sets, this is the recommendation, is you create all of the configuration and application bits and pieces that you need, and then you go to policy sets. So if I go to devices and scroll down and choose wherever I am, policy sets, I can create a new policy set. I've got a couple here already. Click create. I'm going to call this one iOS settings and apps. And then I can choose amongst the apps that I want to make available. Now, the fact that I've called it iOS doesn't mean that it recognizes that these are iOS apps that I want. But I can scroll through and I can select the ones that I'm interested in. And that one, and obviously not Android, but Teams and Whiteboard. And then I can go on to select the app configuration policy that I've previously configured. And if I've got protection policies, again, we're going to talk about all of this later, I can select that as well. And then go on to device management, and I can select a device configuration. And again, these are showing me all the configurations. So it's up to me to realize that I want to find the one for iOS. So I want the email and the Wi-Fi one. Is there a compliance policy? There may be. Let's find it. Yes, there is. This is a Windows one, but for sake of argument, I could select that. Probably a good idea to not do that. So let's click back out of that. But were I to have created an iOS one, then I could select it here. Device enrollment. This is not relevant here because this is a Windows setting, so I can ignore that. And now I go on to assignments. And here I can specify that it's going to be assigned to specific groups or all users or whatever. And that's the significant benefit of using a policy set. You can select your apps and their settings and their security controls. You can select compliance, you can select device configuration and so on. And if it's Windows, you can configure device enrollment even. And then in a single step, assign all of that. And that means that the only place you need to look for assignments is under policy sets, as opposed to having to look at each individual application, configuration profile, compliance policy, and enrollment setting. And once I'm ready to go ahead and do that, I can click to create it. And away I'll go. I haven't assigned it here, so it's not going to actually do anything, but it's ready to use when I want to. In a demo network, it's a good idea to not assign stuff unless you're ready to deal with the consequences, which can be quite rapid and sometimes unexpected if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. So that all looks fine. I've got nothing else to say to that really. So just to summarize, it's a real time saver, I think. And from a logic standpoint, it helps you understand much better where settings are coming from, because you only need to look in one place if you're experiencing a problem. In the demonstration, you learned how to create and assign a policy set.